There is a version of you that other people can control without ever touching you. They say one sentence and your mood changes. They ignore you and you spend the entire night wondering why they disrespect you. And suddenly you feel the need to prove yourself. They criticize you and you replay their words for hours. They provoke you and you react exactly the way they wanted. The moment someone provokes you, there is a tiny window between what they do and what you do next. Most people never notice that window. Someone says something disrespectful, sends a cold message, criticizes them, ignores them, or deliberately pushes a sensitive button, and they react almost instantly. The reaction feels automatic, but it isn't. There is always a moment where you can choose whether to give that person access to your emotional state. That moment is where your power begins. Anger creates urgency. It tells you that you need to respond now, defend yourself now, explain yourself now, or punish the other person now. But urgency is often the enemy of control. When you're emotionally charged, your mind becomes focused on winning the moment rather than protecting your long-term interests. You may say something that feels satisfying for 5 seconds and regret it for 5 days. You may send a message that cannot be taken back. You may turn a small disagreement into a conflict that consumes hours of your attention. The pause interrupts that pattern. You don't need a dramatic meditation session. Sometimes the pause is only 3 seconds. Take a breath. Relax your jaw. Stop typing. Look away. Let the first emotional impulse pass without obeying it. That small delay gives your thinking a chance to catch up with your emotion. Instead of asking, how do I respond to this? Ask yourself, does this deserve a response at all? That question changes everything. Imagine someone insults you in front of other people. Your instinct may be to immediately strike back because you believe silence will make you look weak. But reacting instantly may actually give the person exactly what they wanted. They wanted to control the emotional temperature of the room, and you allowed them to do it. They pushed a button, and you proved that the button works. Now imagine you pause. You look at them. You don't rush. You don't defend every detail. You don't raise your voice. You simply decide what deserves your energy. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. The other person has to deal with their own behavior instead of your emotional reaction. You have removed the reward they were expecting. This doesn't mean you should tolerate genuine disrespect or allow people to cross important boundaries. Emotional control is not passive submission. In fact, it makes boundaries stronger because you're setting them from a position of clarity rather than rage. You can say, don't speak to me that way without screaming. You can walk away without slamming the door. You can end a conversation without creating another problem. The pause also protects you from misinterpretation. When you're angry, your mind searches for evidence that confirms your anger. A neutral expression suddenly looks hostile. A delayed response looks intentional. A simple disagreement feels like an attack. Your emotional state begins writing a story, and you start reacting to the story instead of the actual event. The pause gives you enough distance to ask, what do I actually know? Maybe the person was careless rather than malicious. Maybe they misunderstood you. Maybe their behavior had nothing to do with you. And even if they intentionally tried to provoke you, you still have a choice about whether their strategy succeeds. The strongest habit you can build is learning to become slower when everyone else expects you to become faster. When someone raises their voice, lower yours. When someone rushes you, slow down. When someone demands an immediate answer, give yourself time. When anger tells you to act, create space. Your first emotional impulse is information, not an instruction. You can notice it without following it. You can feel anger without becoming anger. You can recognize disrespect without becoming disrespectful. And you can let the moment pass before deciding what you actually want to do with it. One of the fastest ways to become emotionally exhausted is to believe that everything people do is somehow about you. Someone doesn't respond to your message, and your mind immediately creates a story. They must be ignoring you. They must not respect you. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe they're trying to make you feel insignificant. One small event becomes an entire psychological investigation, and suddenly you're carrying an emotional burden that may never have belonged to you in the first place. The truth is that people are usually far more occupied with themselves than they are with you. They wake up thinking about their problems, their ambitions, their relationships, their insecurities, their fears, and their own private struggles. Their mood may have nothing to do with you. Their silence may have nothing to do with you. Their impatience may have nothing to do with you. But when you interpret every behavior personally, you give ordinary events extraordinary power. Imagine walking into a room and someone doesn't greet you. You could interpret it as disrespect. Or you could recognize that you don't actually know what is happening inside that person's mind. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe they're exhausted. Maybe something happened before they entered the room. Maybe they simply didn't see you. Your mind wants certainty, but reality often doesn't provide it. This is where emotional maturity begins. Learning to separate what you know from what you assume. You know what happened. You don't automatically know why it happened. That distinction can save you from countless unnecessary emotional reactions. The same principle applies to criticism. When someone criticizes you, your ego may immediately interpret the criticism as an attack on your identity. Instead of hearing information, you hear rejection. Instead of examining the statement, you start defending yourself. But criticism can be separated into two parts: the information itself and the meaning you attach to it. Someone can say something negative about your work without defining your worth. Someone can disagree with your decision without becoming your enemy. Someone can dislike your personality without proving that there is something wrong with you. You don't have to turn every disagreement into a battle for your identity. This becomes especially important when dealing with difficult people. Some people genuinely enjoy provoking others. They make subtle comments, create unnecessary tension, or deliberately test boundaries. Their goal may be to make you emotional because your reaction gives them a sense of power. If you take their behavior personally, you step directly into the trap. Instead, observe, notice the pattern. Ask yourself what the person is trying to accomplish. The moment you stop asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and start asking, "What kind of behavior am I observing?" you create psychological distance. You are no longer inside the situation. You are watching it. That distance gives you options. You can respond. You can ignore it. You can establish a boundary. You can leave. You can decide that the situation isn't worth another minute of your attention. And there is another powerful realization. Not everyone deserves access to your emotional world. Some opinions should simply remain outside the door. Someone who doesn't understand your goals doesn't need to approve of them. Someone who doesn't appreciate your personality doesn't need to be convinced. Someone who misunderstands your intentions doesn't automatically deserve a 20-minute explanation. You can allow people to misunderstand you without immediately rushing to correct them. This is difficult because the human mind wants social acceptance. We naturally want to be understood, respected, and included. But if you make your peace dependent on universal approval, you will spend your life negotiating with other people's perceptions. Someone will always misunderstand you. Someone will always criticize you. Someone will always prefer someone else. Someone will always have an opinion. Your freedom begins when you realize that their opinion can exist without becoming your emotional responsibility. You don't need to hate people who dislike you. You don't need to prove them wrong. You don't need revenge. You simply need to stop carrying their perspective around as if it were a fact about you. When you stop personalizing everything, your mind becomes quieter. You begin responding to reality instead of assumptions. You stop creating enemies out of strangers, insults out of accidents, and rejection out of silence. And eventually, you learn to look at another person's behavior and think, That tells me something about them, but it doesn't have to control me. One of the most exhausting habits you can develop is constantly trying to prove your value to other people. The moment someone questions you, doubts you, criticizes you, or misunderstands you, something inside you demands a response. You want to explain yourself. You want to show them what they got wrong. You want to make them recognize your intelligence, your intentions, your abilities, or your importance. But the more desperately you try to convince someone of your worth, the more power you give them over your emotional state. Your value does not increase because someone approves of you. And it does not decrease because someone fails to recognize you. This sounds simple, but most people live as if the opposite were true. They constantly monitor how others perceive them. They change their behavior to avoid criticism. They explain every decision. They defend every mistake. They try to make everyone understand their intentions. And slowly, without realizing it, they stop living according to their own standards and start living according to an invisible audience. Think about the last time someone misunderstood you. Your first instinct may have been to correct them immediately. You wanted them to know the real story. You wanted them to see that you weren't the person they thought you were. But ask yourself something. What happens if they never understand? Does your character suddenly change? Does your experience disappear? Does your future become smaller? No. Their interpretation is simply their interpretation. You can correct a factual misunderstanding when it matters. You can defend yourself when there are serious consequences, but you don't need to turn every opinion into a courtroom where you are forced to prove your innocence. The need to prove yourself often comes from insecurity. When you are deeply uncertain about your own value, external validation becomes addictive. Every compliment gives you a temporary high. Every criticism feels like a threat. Every rejection feels like evidence that something is wrong with you. Your emotional stability becomes dependent on reactions you cannot control. But when you develop internal standards, something changes. You begin asking a different question, not what do they think of me? But, do I respect the way I handled myself? That question puts control back in your hands. If you know you acted with discipline, you don't need applause. If you know you kept your word, you don't need someone else to certify your character. If you know you are improving, you don't need to convince people who have already decided to underestimate you. There will always be people who misunderstand your ambition. Some will call confidence arrogance. Some will call boundaries selfishness. Some will call discipline obsession. Some will criticize you simply because your choices make them uncomfortable. If you spend your life correcting every person, you will never have enough energy left to build your life. Sometimes the most powerful response to doubt is improvement. Don't argue, build, don't announce, demonstrate. Don't chase approval, develop competence. When people underestimate you, you don't have to rush to prove them wrong. Let your actions accumulate. Let consistency speak. Let results become the explanation. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or refusing legitimate feedback. There is a difference between confidence and stubbornness. A confident person can hear criticism without collapsing. They can admit mistakes without feeling worthless. They can change their behavior without believing their identity has been destroyed. That is real emotional strength. You should be able to say, I was wrong, without thinking, I am worthless. You should be able to say, I don't know, without feeling inferior. You should be able to hear, I don't like you, without thinking, I must become someone else. You are allowed to be misunderstood. You are allowed to be disliked. You are allowed to disappoint people. You are allowed to outgrow relationships that require you to constantly prove yourself. The more comfortable you become with those realities, the less vulnerable you become to manipulation. Someone cannot easily control you with rejection if you no longer fear being rejected. Someone cannot control you with criticism if you can evaluate criticism calmly. Someone cannot control you with disapproval if your standards come from within. Your goal is not to convince everyone that you are valuable. Your goal is to become so grounded in your own standards that you no longer feel compelled to argue about your value. There is a difference between understanding someone's emotions and becoming controlled by them. Most people never learn that difference. They walk into a room where someone is angry, and within minutes they are angry too. They spend time with someone negative, and suddenly everything looks negative. Someone becomes anxious, and they begin feeling anxious themselves. Someone starts complaining, and before long they are complaining about the same things. Without realizing it, they are allowing other people's emotional states to become their own. Emotional strength begins when you learn to observe people without absorbing them. Imagine standing beside a person who is shouting. Their voice is loud, their body is tense, and their frustration is obvious. Your instinct may be to match their energy. You raise your voice because they raised theirs. You become defensive because they became aggressive. Now there are two emotional people in the room instead of one. The situation escalates, and both sides believe the other person caused it. But what if you simply observed? You could recognize that they are angry without becoming angry yourself. You could listen to what they are saying without allowing their emotional intensity to dictate yours. You could think, this person is experiencing a strong emotional reaction right now. I don't have to experience it with them. That small mental separation creates enormous control. People often confuse empathy with emotional absorption. Empathy allows you to understand what someone may be feeling. Absorption means you take their feeling into yourself and begin acting from it. You can understand someone's frustration without becoming frustrated. You can understand someone's fear without becoming afraid. You can recognize someone's insecurity without allowing it to make you defensive. This is especially important when dealing with difficult personalities. Some people communicate through emotional pressure. They become angry because they want you to become defensive. They become dramatic because they want you to abandon your position. They create guilt because they want you to change your decision. They may not consciously understand what they are doing, but the result is the same. Their emotional state becomes a tool for influencing yours. If you absorb their emotion, you enter their frame. If you observe it, you remain in your own. Think about how different a conversation becomes when one person refuses to match the emotional intensity of the other. Someone says, "You never listen to me." Instead of immediately defending yourself, you stay calm and say, "I hear that you're frustrated." You haven't accepted their accusation. You haven't attacked them. You have simply recognized their emotional state. That distinction can prevent an argument from becoming a war. The same principle applies outside direct conflict. Social media is filled with outrage, fear, comparison, jealousy, and anger. If you consume enough of it without awareness, you can start carrying emotions that were never yours. You wake up calm, scroll through a few posts, and suddenly your mind is filled with problems that have nothing to do with your actual life. This is why you need psychological boundaries. Not every emotion around you deserves to enter you. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every argument deserves participation. Not every person's crisis deserves to become your crisis. You can care without caring. You can listen without absorbing. You can support someone without sacrificing your own stability. The key is to maintain an internal observer. When you notice yourself becoming emotionally affected by someone, don't immediately act. Notice what is happening inside you. Ask, is this my emotion, or did I just pick it up from someone else? That question creates distance. Maybe you were calm 5 minutes ago, and after speaking to someone, you suddenly feel irritated. Instead of assuming the irritation is justified, examine where it came from. Maybe the person was complaining continuously. Maybe they were insulting everyone around them. Maybe they were projecting their frustration onto you. Recognizing the source gives you the ability to separate yourself from it. You don't have to become emotionally cold to become emotionally disciplined. In fact, the more control you develop, the more compassion you can have because you aren't drowning in the emotions of everyone around you. You can remain calm while someone else is chaotic. You can remain respectful while someone else is disrespectful. You can remain optimistic while someone else is negative. You can remain focused while someone else is distracted. And when you stop absorbing every emotion around you, you begin to realize that peace is not something other people give you. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of emotional control. Most people believe they need to respond whenever someone says something provocative. They think silence means weakness, surrender, or an inability to defend themselves. But in many situations, silence is not the absence of a response. It is the decision not to give someone the reaction they are trying to extract from you. Think about what happens when someone deliberately provokes you. They make a sarcastic comment. They question your intelligence. They criticize your choices. They bring up something they know will irritate you. They may be waiting for your emotional reaction because that reaction gives them information. The moment you become defensive, angry, or desperate to explain yourself, they learn exactly where your buttons are. Silence interrupts that process. Instead of immediately responding, you pause. You look at the situation. You let the words exist without automatically accepting the invitation to fight. You don't rush to prove yourself. You don't become louder because they became louder. You don't start throwing insults simply because someone threw one at you. You remain composed. That composure can be more powerful than the perfect comeback. There is a psychological difference between someone who cannot respond and someone who chooses not to respond. The first person appears controlled by circumstances. The second person appears to be controlling themselves. Your goal is to become the second person. Silence also prevents emotional escalation. Arguments often become destructive because every sentence creates another sentence. One person makes a comment, the other responds, then the first responds again, and suddenly the original issue has disappeared beneath layers of insults, accusations, and old resentment. You can break that cycle. Sometimes you simply say, I don't want to argue about this. Sometimes you say, we'll talk when we're both calm. Sometimes you say nothing at all. The important thing is that you refuse to participate in a conversation that is designed only to produce emotional damage. But silence doesn't mean ignoring every problem. There are moments when communication is necessary. There are moments when a boundary must be stated clearly. Emotional control doesn't mean becoming passive. It means choosing your response based on what will actually improve the situation rather than what your anger wants to do in the moment. Imagine someone repeatedly disrespects you. You could spend an hour explaining why their behavior is unacceptable. You could insult them back. You could try to make them feel the same pain they caused you. Or you could calmly say, if you continue speaking to me this way, I'm leaving. Then follow through. No dramatic speech, no endless argument, no need to convince them that your boundary is reasonable. Your behavior communicates the boundary. This is where silence becomes powerful. You stop trying to force someone to understand you. You allow their behavior to reveal who they are, and then you decide what access they deserve. Another reason silence is powerful is that it protects your dignity. Anger often makes people say things they would never say when calm. They reveal private information. They make threats. They exaggerate. They confess insecurities. They say things designed to wound. Later, when the emotion disappears, they have to live with what they said. Silence gives you protection from your own temporary emotions. You don't have to answer every message immediately. You don't have to respond to every accusation. You don't have to defend yourself against every rumor. You don't have to explain your decisions to everyone. And you don't have to prove that you are unaffected. Sometimes people will intentionally test whether they can get a reaction from you. If you react every time, they learn that provoking you works. If you remain calm and selective, the pattern eventually loses its reward. Your silence should not come from fear. It should come from choice. There is a difference between being silent because you are afraid to speak and being silent because you know speaking would accomplish nothing. The first is suppression. The second is discipline. When you master this distinction, you stop seeing every interaction as a contest that must be won. You start seeing your attention as something valuable. You become selective about where you place your energy. Some battles deserve your voice. Others deserve your absence. Some people deserve an explanation. Others deserve a boundary. Some situations require action. Others require nothing more than your decision to walk away. And the more comfortable you become with silence, the less desperate you become to control what other people think, say, or feel, because you finally understand that you don't need to respond to everything that tries to disturb your peace. The less direction you have in your own life, the more power you give to other people's opinions. When you don't know what you're building, every criticism feels important. When you don't have a clear purpose, every rejection feels personal. When you are constantly looking outward for validation, someone else's approval can determine whether you feel confident today or insecure tomorrow. The solution is not to convince everyone to respect you. The solution is to build a life so grounded in your own standards that other people's opinions stop controlling your emotional state. Think about how much time people waste wondering what others think. They replay conversations, analyze messages, compare themselves on social media, worry about being judged, and constantly adjust their behavior to fit expectations. Their attention is scattered across hundreds of external opinions, while their own goals remain neglected. You cannot build a powerful life while spending all day monitoring the audience. At some point, you have to decide what matters to you. What are you trying to become? What are you trying to build? What skills are you developing? What standards are you unwilling to compromise? What kind of person do you want to be when nobody is watching? When these questions become more important than approval, something changes inside you. You stop needing everyone to understand your decisions. You stop chasing people who don't value you. You stop explaining your ambition to people who don't share it. Your attention returns to your mission, and a person with a mission is much harder to manipulate. If your entire identity depends on being liked, someone can control you simply by withdrawing approval. If your confidence depends on praise, someone can weaken you with criticism. If your happiness depends on being included, someone can control you through exclusion. But when your identity is connected to your principles, your skills, your work, your discipline, and your progress, external approval becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant. It means becoming internally anchored. You can still listen to criticism. You can still learn from other people. You can still admit mistakes, but you don't automatically surrender your judgment just because someone disagrees with you. There is a major difference between being influenced and being controlled. A strong person can hear an opinion and evaluate it. A weak emotional state hears an opinion and immediately obeys it. This is why building competence is so important. When you become genuinely capable, you don't need to announce it constantly. Your confidence begins coming from evidence. You know what you can do because you have done difficult things before. You trained when you didn't feel like training. You worked when nobody was watching. You kept promises to yourself. You survived failures. You learned from mistakes. You became better. Those experiences create a type of confidence that applause cannot create and criticism cannot easily destroy. Now imagine someone tries to make you feel insignificant. Instead of immediately reacting, you think about your life. You know where you're going. You know what you've accomplished. You know what you're working toward. Their opinion becomes information rather than a verdict. That is freedom. Your goal should not be to reach a point where nobody bothers you. That's impossible. Your goal is to become someone who can be bothered without being controlled. People will talk. Let them. People will misunderstand. Let them. People will criticize your choices. Listen if there is something useful. Discard what isn't. People will leave. Let them go when their presence requires you to abandon yourself. The more seriously you take your own development, the less interesting unnecessary drama becomes. You begin realizing that every minute spent arguing with someone is a minute taken away from something you could be building. Your career, your health, your knowledge, your relationships, your creativity, your future. That is the trade most people fail to recognize. Every time you obsess over someone else's opinion, you are paying for it with your attention. And attention is life. So become selective. Don't give your best mental energy to people who only want to disturb you. Give it to the goals that deserve it. Give it to becoming stronger, wiser, calmer, and more capable. Eventually, you reach a point where someone can dislike you without destroying your confidence. Someone can criticize you without ruining your day. Someone can walk away without making you chase them. Someone can misunderstand you without forcing you into an endless explanation. Not because you stopped caring about people, but because you finally started caring deeply about the direction of your own life. When your purpose becomes louder than the opinions around you, anger loses its grip. When your standards become stronger than the need for approval, rejection loses its power. When your attention is committed to something meaningful, petty provocations become too expensive to entertain. Build your life. Protect your attention. Strengthen your standards. Let people have their opinions. You don't need to defeat every person who misunderstands you. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to convince everyone that you're valuable. You only need to become so committed to your own growth that other people's opinions no longer decide who you become. That is when peace stops being something other people can take away from you. That is when you become emotionally free.